I was watching one of Rick Stein's travelogues a while back. If you don't know Rick Stein, he's a celebrity chef from England who enjoys traveling, basically. So his shows normally combine those two passions. He travels to various parts of the world, primarily to explore the different food cultures and stories from that region. And along the way, he picks up different ingredients and recipe ideas to import to his restaurant back home as well. He'll put new items on the menu inspired by the places where he's just been traveling. Seems like a pretty good life to me, and I quite enjoy watching his adventures. In this one episode, he'd gone to Spain where he met Chris Stewart. Chris Stewart was the original drummer in the band Genesis and one of their founding members. Stewart had given up the music life, however, and in the late 1980s, he'd moved to this remote region in Spain where he'd become a farmer, and he'd also become an author. He started writing books about his experiences and the challenges of moving to this really remote region in the Spanish mountains. And one of his books, called Driving Over Lemons, became an international bestseller in the late 1990s. In this clip, he's talking with Rick Stein in his kitchen about the book, and he's explaining where this title came from.
I say using lemons because, after all, I wouldn't want to see you cooking with anything but.
Absolutely not. No, lemons, as you can imagine, are a big part of our lives.
So where did you get the inspiration for Driving Over Lemons? The title.
It's a good title, isn't it?
Yeah, really good.
And the booksellers will tell you that the important thing about a book is the title and the cover. The stuff that appears in the book is not really neither here nor there. But it came because, as you might have noticed when you drove in through Tijola, the village, there's a lot of lemon trees overhanging the road. And after a wind, when the lemons are ripe, hundreds of them fall on the road. It's like driving over a mat of lemons. And when I first came here, I couldn't bring myself to drive over them because a lemon in a British supermarket cost you about 4 bob back in those days. And so I would stop and go round each lemon until somebody said, no, drive over lemons. And nowadays I do. I drive over lemons because there's just so many lemons about there.
Great title.
So coming from a British background, and especially in the time period when Chris Stewart grew up, which I guess would have been the 1960s, lemons were quite exotic and rare in those days in the UK, and as such they were a precious commodity. It was expensive to buy a lemon. They were something that had real value at that time. However, when he moved to Spain, he discovered there was such an abundance of lemons there that the locals really didn't value them very much at all. There were just thousands of lemons hanging off the trees, falling onto the road, just lemons everywhere. More lemons than what they knew what to do with, really. And because there were just so many lemons, the Spanish didn't really value them. In fact, they treated them with a certain amount of contempt. They just drove over them when they were lying in the middle of the road. Now, at first, Stewart couldn't bring himself to do that because he still had that very British mentality, which is lemons are a valuable thing. But in the passing of time, he gradually adapted and he began driving over them as well, and hence the title of his book. I saw this principle for myself just last year when I was in Spain, not with lemons, but with oranges. I was in a small village in Mallorca. I was just wandering around taking photos when I noticed there were all of these orange trees everywhere in gardens, just all over the village. And then I noticed that underneath these trees, there were hundreds and hundreds of oranges just being left to rot. Nobody was eating them. Nobody was using them. They were just going to waste. This is a food that in many parts of the world would be a real prize, but because of their sheer abundance in Spain, the people were just letting them rot. And that's what reminded me of that book and what reminded me of the Rick Stein episode. Now, this is a very visible example of what economists call the scarcity principle. This is one of the fundamental principles of economics. It's something you'll learn on day 1 of economics class. The scarcity principle says that the scarcer something is, the more we tend to value it. And conversely, the more abundant something is, the less we tend to value it. I'll give you a Scottish example of the scarcity principle. Here in Scotland, we have got an abundance of water. It falls from the sky in copious quantities. Now, the benefit of that is that we never have to worry about going thirsty. Scotland is one of the few places in the world where what you drink from the tap is cleaner, fresher, and better than anything you'll find in bottles. We never have to worry about there not being enough. It's free. We just have an abundance of clean, fresh water, and that's a great thing. And because of that, though, I will sometimes find myself treating water as though it's not got much value. Maybe I'll fill a glass from the tap, I'll put it down somewhere, I'll walk away, I'll go do something else, I'll forget about it. It turns a bit foosty because it's been lying out for a while, so I'll just end up pouring the rest down the sink. Or this is what I sometimes do, is I will fill up a glass with more than what I need, I'll just take a few swigs or sips, and then I'll just pour the rest away. I'll often do that. However, about 10 years ago, I was dating a girl whose family lived in the south of Spain, and I was down there when I asked for a drink of water, and they gave me one, and then I did what I often do. I drank some of it, I didn't want all of it, so I just poured the rest of it down the drain. When I did it though, I noticed my girlfriend flinching a little bit, and I suddenly realized, hang on a second, that didn't come for free out of a tap, that came out of a bottle. This had been bought in a shop. Clean, fresh water in the south of Spain is not this freely abundant thing like what I'm used to. They've got a lot of lemons and oranges, but water, that's a precious commodity. There's a scarcity to it here. Sometimes it runs out, sometimes there's droughts, and therefore clean, fresh water has real value in that region. You don't pour it down the drain, you don't treat it with that kind of contempt. This is a valuable resource here. And as I thought about this, I had this epiphany and I thought, this is a problem, for humanity, and it's a sad indictment of humanity that the more blessed we are, the less we tend to value the blessing. And the more we tend to treat that blessing with contempt as though it's not even really a blessing at all. I've used this clip before, but this is Louis C.K. talking about air travel, and I think it perfectly highlights the principle that I'm trying to talk about. When air travel first arrived, it was scarce. Most people couldn't do it. It was too expensive. So those who were lucky enough to have that opportunity considered it to be an almost magical experience. They really valued that experience. However, now that air travel has become commonplace and abundant, people tend to treat it with a kind of contempt, like it's this massive inconvenience in their lives. I'll play this clip. It's called "Everything's Amazing, but Nobody's Happy." There's all this abundance of blessing, but everyone's contemptuous of it. And what Louis C.K. is saying is maybe we need to go back to scarcity so that we learn to place value on these things that we have once more.
Those were simpler times, I think. I just feel like we may be going back to that, by the way. But in a way, good, because when I read things like the foundations of capitalism are shattering, I'm like, maybe we need that. Maybe we need some time where we're walking around with a donkey with pots clanging on the sides.
You think that would just bring us back to reality?
Yeah, because everything is amazing right now, and nobody's happy.
Do you feel that we now, in the 21st century, we take technology for granted?
Well, yeah, because now we live in an amazing, amazing world, and it's wasted on the generation of just spoiled idiots that don't care, because this is what people are like now. They got their phone, and they're like, it won't... Give it a second. It's going to space. Can you give it a second to get back from space? I was on an airplane and there was internet, high-speed internet on the airplane. That's the newest thing that I know exists. And I'm sitting on the plane and they go, open up your laptop, you can go on the internet. And it's fast and I'm watching YouTube clips. I'm in an airplane. And then it breaks down. And they apologize, the internet's not working. The guy next to me goes, pfft. Like how quickly the world owes him something he knew existed only 10 seconds ago.
Right.
Lying is the worst one because people come back from flights and they tell you their story. And it's like a horror story. They act like their flight was like a cattle car in the 40s in Germany. That's how bad they make it sound.
Right.
They're like, it was the worst day of my life. First of all, we didn't board for 20 minutes.
Right.
And then we get on the plane and they made us sit there on the runway for 40 minutes. We had to sit there. Oh, really? What happened next? Did you fly through the air incredibly like a bird? Did you partake in the miracle of human flight, you non-contributing zero, that you got to fly? You're flying! It's amazing. Everybody on every plane should just constantly be going, wow!
Yes.
You're flying. You're sitting in a chair in the sky.
Yes.
But it doesn't go back a lot. and it's
Chairs
not really... here's the thing. People, they say there's delays on flights.
Yeah.
Delays, really? New York to California in 5 hours. That used to take 30 years.
The more we have been abundantly blessed, the more we take it for granted, the more blind we become to the fact that we are blessed, and we could even say the more contemptuous we become of the blessing. Have you ever seen kids in the West opening up presents on Christmas Day? And even though they're surrounded by gifts, clearly they're very blessed, clearly they're very wealthy, they throw a tantrum because this one isn't exactly the one that they wanted.
Don't you even think about getting...
What's wrong with this phone? Look
What the
at
heck
it.
is that?
Huh?
Stop! Get that out of
What's
my
wrong
face.
with What's wrong with that phone?
What is this? Is this from 2008? Are you freaking serious right now?
Baby, it's got a SIM card, a battery, everything.
It's not even funny. This phone is better than that.
What? That's the top of the line LG.
You don't understand my pain.
What?
I got $50 for Christmas. I was waiting a whole year, and I got $50.
But then you contrast that with kids who are poor by comparison, and they receive something which is so humble and so meager, and yet they're so happy, they're so joyful, and they're so thankful at what they've been given. Well, this is the scarcity principle in action. The more we have, the less we tend to value it. This is partly why so many today want to tear down capitalism, because they don't value the blessings that capitalism has actually brought. Because of capitalism, 1 billion less people today are living in poverty now compared to 1990. On average, 47 million people per year are moving above the international poverty line. They're moving out of poverty. Capitalism is continually raising the floor for everyone. It's making everyone's lives better. My grandparents, for a large part of their lives, didn't have indoor toilets. They had to go outside if they wanted to use the bathroom. They couldn't afford a TV. A generation before them and my ancestors had 10 people minimum squeezed into this tiny cottage with 2 rooms, and half their kids were dying in infancy, if not more. And look at us today. Our ancestors would be in awe of the kind of lives that we can all live today. And yet, as we have increased in blessing, the more we've taken it for granted, the more blind we become to the fact we are blessed, and the more contemptuous we become of that blessing, which is partly why so many kids in our generation, I think, are trying to tear down capitalism. They don't understand what they've got. They don't understand what they've been given. They've been given so much that they don't value it anymore. A lack of gratitude is causing them to hate what they have, in fact. I wonder also if the scarcity principle explains why our society has lately become so contemptuous of God. This is partly what's contributing to the rise in atheism. I mean, imagine you're God and you've created this amazing planet for humans to live on, and it is incredible. I mean, look at this place. Look at how blessed we are. Look how beautiful this place is, and look at the variety of the beauty as well. Look at the beaches. Look at the color of that water. Look at what the sun randomly does from time to time with all of these different colors. And then once it goes down, look how the sky literally starts to sparkle. The sky starts sparkling. And if the beaches and stars aren't your thing, then what about mountains? And what about lush forests and deserts? And what about how in parts of the year, a blanket of snow literally just falls out of the sky and it creates these fairy tale winter landscapes, these dreamscapes. And think about how that gives way to an explosion of color every spring as all of these flowers just randomly start popping out of the ground. You don't even need to do anything to make this happen. This just happens naturally. This just springs out of nowhere. And then on a lot of the trees, fruit will start to grow as well. And some of this fruit, you don't need to put any work in. It just hangs there. Like in Spain, as we've been watching, as we've been seeing earlier, it's so abundant, it carpets the ground. There's so much of it. There's just so much abundance and blessing. And think of all the animals that live here, and think about how we've all been built with this capacity for love, and where things like music are possible, and the beauty of that music, and technology like air travel. This world is astonishing. We are so blessed. But perhaps the irony of the scarcity principle is that the more abundantly God blesses us, the more we've begun to take him for granted, the more blind we become to his blessing, and the more contemptuous we become of God and his blessing. And again, I think this is partly where atheism comes from today. It's perhaps a predictable and yet very sad thing that as we become more prosperous in our time, churches have begun to empty. It's a taking for granted. It's a blindness to everything God has done for us. And we actually see this pattern in the Old Testament quite often, so they shouldn't take us by surprise, where God blesses Israel, but in that blessing, they begin to go astray, which then leads to a collapse of their civilization. Then out of the ruins, they then turn back to God, and the cycle repeats. We see that happening in the Old Testament, so we shouldn't be surprised when it happens today either. But it just makes me think, how would it be if we could be blessed and not have it ruin us? What if we could be blessed and not be spoiled by it? What would it look like to live in blessing and not take that blessing for granted, not become blind to it, and not become contemptuous of it? What if we could stay conscious and thankful of just how miraculous this life is? How much better would our lives be? How much happier would we be if we could combat the scarcity principle? Because look how miserable people become when they lose sight of their blessings. Look how miserable they are. Look how ugly people become when they are blind to and contemptuous of all the good things in their life. And for this reason, I think this is something that we as Christians in particular need to do. We need to consciously be living a life of thankfulness towards God. Every time we eat food, whether that be lemons, oranges, or something else, be thankful. Every time we get to drink clean, fresh water, be thankful. Every time we get on a plane and get to experience the miracle of air travel, every time we receive a gift, no matter how small that gift may be, every time we benefit from indoor plumbing, every time we get to see a sunset or a starry sky or see spring flowers, what if we live this life of daily conscious thankfulness? And how would that protect us from so much misery and problems, both individual and societal? And how would it turn ugliness into beauty if we simply had this attitude of gratitude? The Bible encourages us in this, saying, always be joyful, never stop praying, be thankful in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus. So this is something I want to challenge myself to do going forward, but I also want to challenge you to do it as well. It's a very simple thing, but I want us to see what kind of change this tiny difference can make in our lives. As we go through life, consciously give thanks for the good things that you experience. It can just be a 5-second thing inside your head. It doesn't need to be a big deal, but just be conscious and actively grateful for the good things that are happening in your life. Perhaps at the end of the day, you can just take 30 seconds to consciously thank God for something good that happened that day. Even if it's just waking up and getting to see another day, just actively be thankful towards God. I wonder what kind of difference this can make. I think we should do this so as not to take our blessings for granted, so as not to become blind to our blessings, and so as not to become contemptuous of our blessings. I think we should do this to live a life of contentment and to live a life of joy.